Hi, I'm Dani Ives. I'm an artist, educator, and author. I'm thrilled to be collaborating with Felted Sky in bringing you these painting with wool kits. In the following video, I'm going to give you a quick tour of the supplies you'll find in your needle felting kit, and then I'm going to guide you along each step in creating your wool painting. Ready? Let's get started. Before we get started with our wool painting, I would love to introduce you to the different supplies that you have in your kit. So let me just open this up. Okay, so right on top, we have an 8-inch embroidery hoop. This is made in the UK. This is a great quality hoop that we will use to frame our final wool painting at the very end. There's also an insert here. Of course, you found the link for the video. There's a little bit more information about the different types of supplies that we use for painting with wool, a little bit of information about how to hold your felting needle, and a few extra words from me and where you can find some more information about me and about Felted Sky. You'll also see a piece of linen. So linen is one of my favorite base textiles for painting with wool. So we'll be using this for the base of all of our needle felting. And you'll notice too that it's pretty thin, which is actually great. That's perfect for us because we'll be using the transparency of the fabric to help us transfer the toadstool pattern to this in just a bit. So there's a Felter's foam mat here. I'll talk about that in a second. I'm going to go ahead and grab these wool colors. So you'll find 11 different colors of Felter's palette wool. So these colors, they're beautiful. I love using Felted Sky's wools. They are super high quality, and the palette that they come in is just stunning. So I've picked out some of my favorites here that we'll be using for the toadstool hoop, and we'll be layering. We might mix a little, and you'll be using these to create lots of different textures and different elements of the toadstool hoop. Okay, so back to the Felter's foam mat. So this is your work surface. Foam is great for beginners for needle felting. If you decide you want to invest in something a little bit more durable, you can check out a wool mat, which is something Felted Sky also offers, but I love using felting foam. You can use both sides, and this is what we do all of our needle felting on top of. It's nice and thick to help protect your tabletop or any other work surface you decide to use, but this is your felting surface. And then you have felting needles, of course. So inside here, you have 2 size 38 star needles. So 38 star is basically a great all-purpose needle. 38 refers to the gauge, which means it's kind of middle of the road. It's an all-purpose size. And star refers to the shape of the bottom of the needle where the barbs live. So star needles have one extra ridge when compared to triangle needles, which means they have a few extra barbs. So they'll help you get your felting done a little bit faster. You've got 2 in here just in case you bend or break one, but they will last you a super long time. And then of course you have your pattern at the bottom. So we'll be using this to transfer these lines to that linen fabric. So those will serve as guidelines for us as we start to build up our wool painting. The first step that I like to take when starting a wool painting is preparing my fabric. When possible, I like to iron and press my piece so that it is as wrinkle-free and as crease-free as possible. So if you have that option, I recommend it. It's just best to keep it as flat as you can when you're transferring. And also, I just find it's a lot easier to work on when the fabric is flat. So the toadstool scene that we're working on today goes all the way to the edge of the hoop. So let me show you my technique for preparing for transferring an image. I'm going to separate my embroidery hoop and use the outer ring as a guideline for my piece. So I'm just going to set the inner ring aside, and I'm just going to loosen this a little bit and center my embroidery hoop as best as I can inside the fabric. So I'm just gonna make sure I've got even edges all the way around. And then I'm actually going to trace the perimeter of this hoop so that I have a guideline of where my design is going to stop. So I'm going to felt all the way to the edge of this line here. And right now, so I'm just using an ink pen. This is a gel pen that I find works really well for marking on fabric. It's a Uniball Signo pen. Any marker that will leave decent marks on your fabric will work just fine. Sometimes a sharp or a fine tip Sharpie, anything like that will work. So now I've got my circle here, and the next thing I want to do is transfer my pattern. I'm going to use a window for that because the linen here is pretty transparent when you put it up to a window. So I'm going to set that up and show you my process for that. So now I have the pattern and the fabric taped to my window, and I have lined up the mark that I've already made on the fabric, tracing the inside of the hoop with the circle that is on the pattern. And that's just going to keep everything in line and everything as centered as possible. So now I'm going to take my pen and just do my best tracing these patterns and shapes here so that I have some guidelines when I start felting. After you've transferred your pattern, feel free to come back through and adjust any lines that you need to. If maybe you missed a couple, forgot to, connect some edges, just come back in with your pen and fill those out. Then place your fabric on top of your foam pad so that this entire area is over the foam pad and nothing is laying over the edges. So you can kind of see I've got my edges here and here. My image is basically centered right in the middle of the foam pad. The first thing I want to tackle for this toadstool piece is the background sky color, and we'll be using baby blue for that. And you'll notice too that the pattern is actually pretty light. There are a lot more details that go into this piece, but we're going to use layering for that rather than piecing it all together. I find that that's actually going to be an easier approach for most people. Plus you can kind of put your own little twist on it, and all of the elements that we do are going to be easy to execute. So don't worry about the other different elements that come into play later, like the blades of grass and little fern leaves, things like that. Don't worry, I'll walk you through it. So the first thing I want to do is just pull out some of this baby blue wool. I'm going to unroll this. And what I like to do is start kind of piecing it in. So I will just tear off a little piece and just kind of make it fill in a little space. It's easier to add more wool into an area than take it away if you have too much. So keep that in mind. And my method usually is to just go right up to an edge, felt the edge, and then start filling in the other surface area. So I'm just going to start here on the right side, right here along this edge of the circle, and using my felting needle, just start following that line of the hoop that we made. And it's okay to extend beyond it a little bit. In fact, go ahead and extend just a little bit, because that's going to make putting this in the hoop a little bit easier later. So the goal here with filling in the background color with baby blue is to make sure that we have full, even coverage. So I want you to go for no bald or bare spots that you can see the linen through. Right now, I can see a little bit of an area here that's going to need a patch. So I'm just going to take a little bit of wool, lay it right on top, and patch it. Going to fill in this little area down here. I'm going to felt right up to these toadstool lines. I'm going to go ahead and keep those lines visible though, because I do want to know exactly where the edge of the toadstool is for later. We can always clean up these edges or fill in some tiny holes later too. But for now, let's just try to go for that good even coverage. Now, you will see needle holes right now, and it will look a little lumpy, so just keep felting until those lumps start to become a little more uniform. And you can always use a slightly lighter poke. So right now I'm just using my full range of motion to get good coverage on this. But when you're ready to do a more finishing touch, you can just barely poke the tip of your needle in and really start to control the depth of the fibers and the depth of those needle holes. And everything starts to look a little more uniform when you have that amount of control. When I add more blue, I do like to overlap some of this wool with the wool that's currently there. That's going to help prevent you from having seams or lines in your wool when you're piecing it together like this. If you have little extra colors maybe that are sticking in that blue, go ahead and pull them out if you want, or leave them in. It could be like a little confetti sky. This section here is also a good chance to use a multi-needle tool. So sometimes I hold 2 needles together, or I tape them together. But there's also special tools that you can use that hold 2 or 4 or 6 needles. at a time, and those are great for when you're doing large areas like this, especially if they're just one color, if you're just trying to get a lot of coverage. Helps you work a little bit quicker, a little more efficiently. You do have a little less control though, right? Because you're not using one single needle. So there are just a few needles working at a time. I'm going to work my way carefully around this flower. And just like around the toadstools, I'm going to try to keep these lines visible. And sometimes pre-shaping the wool into like a little point, you can just twist it a little bit, push it right up in that area. That'll help you keep those shapes if that's what you'd like to do. Now, if you are comfortable creating a flower shape like this or of your choice, feel free to just fill in this entire area with blue. But right now, I'm just going to work around the flower so that we have that shape ready for us later. But oftentimes, if I'm creating a scene like this, toadstools, forest floor, I will just fill in the entire area in the back with my sky color or my background color, and then I'll just layer my subjects on top. And other times I work like this. Just depends. Okay. So I have a little more to do. Go ahead and fill in this section here in between these two toadstools. Oh, you know what? I went a little too far. Look at that. So here's my little horizon line, but I covered it up with blue. I could have left it, that's fine. But right now I'm going to show you how to remove a little bit of extra wool. So I've already felted this down. You want to avoid this if you can, but if you have to remove some wool, here's my technique. So I'm going to hold my finger down on the piece that I've already felted, and I'm just going to kind of gently try to tease out some of this, which is a little difficult to do because I've already kind of felted this section into this area, right? So it's already connected a little bit and it's tugging at what I've already felted up here where it should be. But I've got some excess off, and so now I'm just going to felt this down. I'm going to patch this one little area right here. Okay, I still have this section to do, and the last thing that I want to do before I move on to any other section is patching and just kind of making sure I've got good even coverage and an even surface area. So I want to make sure it's not too lumpy in any one spot. So I'm going to just speed up the rest part. So you'll see the rest, the remaining part. So you'll see this in a quicker fashion, and also the area where, or the time where I just kind of even everything out. So I'm going to speed this up and I'll see you on the other side. After the sky is filled in, the next section to work on is the ground, and we're just going to give this front section an entire coverage of green, but we're going to do it in 2 layers because in the perspective here, I want this part of the mossy forest floor to kind of come forward a little bit and this part to fall away. So we're going to do that with color, and we'll be using a few different colors, but first starting off, we're going to use ivy and then create some shadows with forest. So I'm going to take my ivy out, and what I want to do is create a full coverage layer that expands from this. We're basically creating a stripe that's just kind of this back layer here. So I'm going to fill that in first, again, using ivy. So I'll just tear up a little bit here. I'll set this up here for easy access. And I'm just going to fill it in, just loosely following these little lines that were on the pattern that you transferred. Just gonna go right up to the toadstool stem. Fill in this little section right here between the 2 toadstools. Now I'm just going to follow this horizon line. Bring this section right down to this other line. Have it meet this line down here. Again, I'm not following it exactly. These are just guidelines. And it'll just help create a little bit of dimension and some different planes to work on when we add plants and some other fun details. Now, here's something to consider if you're doing like a mossy forest floor or something like that. The texture, I think, that you get when you needle felt a little loosely is actually kind of cool because it's kind of bumpy like, you know, real life moss would be. So feel free to leave in as much texture here as you like. Just make sure that you're getting everything felted enough so that it is staying attached to the fabric. That's the goal. Don't forget to extend a little bit beyond the outer perimeter. Doesn't have to be a lot, a little bit will be helpful. Make sure I've got full coverage here, so I'm going to patch that because I can see a little bit of linen peeking through. Now, I want this ivy color to also be the base color for this front section too, but if I go ahead and add the ivy now, I'm going to lose this line that I've already carefully transferred and paid attention to just now when I was doing this back section. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of forest for shading. So I'm going to pull off a little bit. And I'm going to lay down some forest. So I'm going to make a transparent layer so I can see through this. It's thin enough for me to see through, which means when I lay it down, some of that ivy is going to be visible through the forest. So it's like creating a wash of color. And I'm just going to felt this right along this kind of like the bottom half of this ivy section that we've already added. We can always add a little bit more later, but just enough now will help keep these two sections separated. Plus, we're going to do a little bit more color work later to bring this front section forward even more. Go ahead and pop some in right here. And some along this side as well. A little goes a long way. Okay, so now I can fill in the rest of this with ivy. I'm going to try to keep a distinct line right here where the forest and the ivy meet. Okay, I'm gonna speed this up and I will meet you on the other side once all of this is filled in. We can go ahead and add a little bit of color to this front section. I'm going to grab a little more of the forest, so that dark green, and I'm just going to put a little wash of color, so another transparent layer down here toward the bottom. So this just kind of signifies, you know, a little bit more shadow. Maybe this is just kind of a rolling mini hill of moss, and we're just trying to portray some different dimensions and planes here. So I'm going to add a little bit of this darker green down here in this section. And I mean, you can totally play around and just add a little more, just, you know, kind of treat it like a painting and add a touch of dark green here, a touch of dark green there, play around, lay it down to see if you like it there. You can move it around. Add a little more right there. Feel free to make it bolder, a little more saturated by adding a thicker layer of dark green or just more thin layers on top of each other. That will make that dark green bolder, stand out a little bit more. So I'm making mine a little darker toward the bottom edge. And now to make this front part come forward a little bit, we're going to use a lighter green. And for that, we'll be using apple green. So I'm going to pull off a little bit of apple green, and we're going to create a highlight right here at the top edge of this front little mossy area. So basically this apple green is going directly adjacent to this forest green for the darker section. And you'll see what happens. It actually it brings this front section forward. I'm gonna push it right up next to that toadstool. And I think this layer of apple green looks best when it's kind of messy, when it just kind of feathers out at the bottom and kind of does its own thing. I'm going to go ahead and just follow this whole line all the way from one side to the other. And I'm going to make it maybe a little messier in some areas, a little thicker. If I extend this area, it kind of looks like an extra little hill here. So you can definitely, create your own little world with just a few colors. And we can even add a little bit of this apple green to the very edge of this ivy section. So the horizon line, it gives it just a little more dimension, a little more color interest, and almost kind of like a backlit feel. And I'm doing all of this now because we'll be adding some details on top of all of this. Grass blades, wow. Flower stems, little ferns, things like that. And it's easier just to go ahead and have this background detail done rather than kind of work around a bunch of tiny little elements and details. So play around with this, make as many little sections, dimensions as you'd like. I think this is, one of the most fun parts for sure. And when you're ready to move on, we're going to work on the toadstools. To create the toadstools and give them lots of dimension, I'm going to use 4 different colors. We'll be using fawn for the overall base color of the toadstool, but then we're going to give it a little bit of interest and some bright colors with dried lavender, also wood violet, and then we'll create some highlights with polar bear. So I'm going to set these 3 aside and get out a little bit of fawn. I'm going to do one toadstool at a time, and I'll start with the one here on the right because it's technically a little behind this bigger toadstool. It's kind of underneath it, getting a little bit of shade there. So I'm just going to pull off a little bit of fawn, enough to create a nice base layer and some good coverage. Pull off a little extra there. And again, feel free to shape the wool before you even start felting to make it a little easier. And I'm just going to follow this line right along the edge. Just going to fill in the cap, and I'll go ahead and fill in the stem as well. or the stipe, if you want to get technical about toadstools. Make sure I have a nice clean solid line between the toadstool and the sky color. So I'm just adding a little bit extra. And then once we get some of our shading colors on, some of those purples, I'll show you how to make a nice crisp, sharp edge. And it's at this point too, feel free to play around with the shape of your toadstool. If you want to make it a little bit wider at the bottom, which I think is kind of cute. Maybe like a skinnier stem. Maybe you want a really wide cap. Feel free to play around with it. Just a little bit more fawn right here because I can tell there's a little bit of that linen peeking through. Oh, and you know what? I can see linen right here, so I'm just going to add a big chunk. No point in fighting it. It's just so much easier to make sure you have plenty of wool down first before you start adding your layers for your shadows and highlights. Okay, so we've used the fawn. I'll keep that up here just for reference. I'm going to grab a little bit of dried lavender, set that right beside it, and a little bit of wood violet. We're going to be doing a little bit of mixing, but I want to take some of this lavender and just do a little wash of purple. Now, I'm going to set an imaginary light source for these toadstools, and my light source is going to be over here in the top left corner and kind of in front. So that light is going to be hitting the toadstools, and it's going to make a highlight on this top left edge, which means the shadow is going to be the opposite of that. So the shadow is going to be toward the bottom right. That also means that these toadstool caps are going to be casting their own shadow on the stem. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from when I'm adding these colors. My purples are going to serve as my shadow colors. So right now, I'm just going to give the right bottom side of this toadstool cap a little wash of lavender. And now I'm going to make a mixture of lavender and wood violet. Let's start with half and half. So about 50% of each color. Let me demonstrate that real quick. Grab a little bit more lavender, a little more wood violet. So I mix colors by stacking them on top of each other just like this, and I pull the two colors apart so that I have both colors in each hand, and then I stack it again. So now we have 4 layers rather than 2. Grab all of those layers, pull apart, stack, pull apart. This is a way to blend colors to increase your color palette. And of course you could do 50-50, you could do 25-75, more of one color, a little less of the other, and make all kinds of blends to help you create transitions and blend colors seamlessly, or just make new colors. When you're doing this method, just make sure you're pulling and stacking the same direction every time. That's going to keep your fibers going all one direction, and it'll keep them nice and smooth. Okay, so now I have this transition color. You can see that. So there's dried lavender, here's wood violet, here's the mixture. It's a nice blend of the two. So I'm going to take that mixture and I'm going to add some of that again to the bottom right. I've already added just a little bit of lavender, but now I'm just going to darken it. Add a little bit more. And I'm following the shape of the toadstool, so it's got kind of a curve to it. And now I can come in with just plain wood violet. So it's my deepest purple. And I'm going to basically just create a little bit of an outline right along this bottom right edge, this bottom right curve. And you can kind of blend, kind of comb the colors to blend them together if you want. Use the tip of your needle, just kind of spread them out, brush them a bit. Okay, so now I've got a little bit of shadow, a little bit of shaping here. I'm going to take a little bit of polar bear. And now I'm going to create a highlight. So my highlight, again, is going to be in the upper left-hand corner. And I'm going to start with just a little wash of color, so another transparent layer. I can see through it. I'm going to set it right there on top. See if I like it there. I think it looks pretty good. I've made it basically a circle shape to keep the roundness of the toadstool. And I'm just going to tack it in with a light poke to keep those fibers right on top. Now we can go even way more dramatic with this. Do another layer of polar bear. Make it a little more saturated, a little bright. I'm going to come up and kind of redefine this edge here. I'm going to grab a little more baby blue. Kind of clean up that edge. And actually I'm going to take a little more of this wood violet lavender mixture. I'm going to make a line and create just a tiny little outline. So I've done that by pulling off a little bit of wool, twisting it, and now you've got this little rope. And this can act as an outline. I'm going to tuck this right along this back edge where the darkest purple is, but I'm going to actually make this follow the very, very outer edge of this toadstool, come up about halfway. It just kind of makes it pop against the background and it brings it forward a little bit. And it's a fun trick I like to do sometimes if I want something just to come forward. I'm going to grab a little more wood violet, just plain wood violet, not the mixture. So the darkest purple, and I'm going to tuck it right here along the bottom. And create a nice distinct shadow on the stem of the toadstool. Now I'm going to go for the lavender wood violet mixture. And because my light is coming from the upper left, basically the whole right side of this stem is going to be shadowed. So I'm going to add a layer of this wood violet and lavender mixture, just basically on the right half. And then with the darkest purple, wood violet, plain wood violet, I'm going to create a line of shadow on this right edge. We can even give the stem a little bit of a highlight with some polar bear. Give it a little stripy wash of polar bear on the left side. Now to clean up any edges, I use a technique that I call poke and drag. And basically, you're taking the tip of your needle, you're poking it right along the outline where you want a very sharp, clean edge to be. You lift your needle up, but you keep the tip in contact with the fabric. So you're basically dragging the tip of your needle right along this edge, poking it as you go. You're keeping a little bit of pressure on the tip of the needle, not too much though, because you will notice the needle does have a bit of a flex. If you press too hard, it will break. So start lightly, drag, poke, and you can clean up any fuzzy edges. Okay, I'm going to do this entire process again with this bigger toadstool. So I'm going to start with fawn. Let me grab a little bit more so I have some on hand. That should be enough, we'll see. I am going to let just this corner, this right-hand corner of this toadstool cap just kind of overlap. Make sure I get nice, even coverage so that when I layer the other colors, they go on smoothly and I don't have to fight with any of those pesky bald spots. Bald spot right there. And sometimes it's hard to see if you're felting in a similar color as a background fabric. All right, get the stem in. I'm going to kind of bring this bottom edge down a little. There we go. Don't be afraid to layer the wool on top of wool that's already there. I'm doing that right now. I just kind of extended the fawn over onto this baby blue and over onto the greens just to get the shape of stem that I'd like. Just because there's wool already there doesn't mean you can't felt on top of it. And I think layering wool is just one of the coolest techniques. It's one of the best features of needle felting. You can just keep layering and layering. Okay, a little more here. All right, so I have my lavender wood violet mixture still from the last Toadstool. Here's plain wood violet, here's plain lavender. I'll start with the plain lavender so I can give this a little wash of purple. And I'm just spreading out the fibers before I even start felting them down. Let's do a little more up here. Okay, lavender and wood violet mixture is next. Let's go ahead and cover this bottom right corner. Give it a little curve to follow the shape of the toadstool. I'll felt that down. Using a little more shallow poke to keep these fibers right on top rather than burying them further down. I'm going to make sure and take this all the way to the edge. And now, a little bit of wood violet. I'm going to start by making my bottom edge with wood violet. So just felt it right along this edge. A little goes a long way with your darkest shadow color. That's usually true for most things. I'm going to just extend a little bit of the wood violet up that curve. And then now let's go ahead and make the highlight with Polar Bear. So I'm going to mimic the highlight here. I'm going to make it kind of a round shape, upper left-hand corner, basically right in the middle so we can see where this section is untouched by purple. So I'm going to put my Polar Bear basically right in the middle of that. Again, using a shallow poke to keep those fibers right on top. And I'm going to brush this edge here to kind of fade it out a little bit more. I'm going to add a little more right in the center to concentrate it. And I'm going to take, again, the wood violet and lavender mixture, make a line with it, so a little bit of a rope. I'm going to tuck it right along this outline here. Just a little bit of a color trick to make it pop forward. And I'm going to do it right along this bottom edge too. You could always do it around the whole thing, see if you like it. Okay, let's do the stem now. Let's do wood violet and lavender mixture right along the right hand side. Add a little bit more there. wood violet. Concentrate that along the right hand edge. And I'm going to go ahead and do a concentrated line right underneath here too. And then now, polar bear along the left-hand side. You could even take a little bit of wood violet or the wood violet lavender mixture and tuck it right here. Just a very thin line. You can place it using that poke and drag technique. Do it on both toadstools here. Ooh, I think even adding some right there along this bottom cap edge would look really good. So I'm going to tuck some right in between the baby blue and that fawn. Yeah, that looks good. I like that. Okay, let's move on to the flower. The first thing I want to do on the flower is fill in the stem and the leaf, since those are, the stem is technically behind these petals and make it a little bit easier. And then we'll do the petals and the center of the flower as well. So I'm going to pick ivy. Feel free to pick any color you'd like for the stem and for the leaf. But I'm going to start with the stem. I'm going to pull off kind of a long piece of ivy here. And I'm going to twist it to see about how thick this would be if I were to felt it down. It starts thinner at the top, it gets a little bit thicker because there's more wool, and I want it to be relatively uniform. So where it is thicker, I'm just going to gently tug and kind of pull those fibers apart a little bit more. That will thin it out. And then I'm going to set this down and determine about how long I need my stem to be. And so I'm going to remove some of this to make this a little bit easier. So I'm going to twist this again. Just kind of go ahead and make those fibers start interacting with each other. And then I'm just going to anchor it right where I want my stem to start, underneath the flower head. So now it's anchored. I've poked it in one spot multiple times so that it stays there. And I'm just going to use my other hand just to guide my line and just gently pull these tight. I'm not pulling them out. Don't want to pull them too hard because it will release those fibers that you've just anchored, but just keep it a little tight. And just going to gently poke right down the line, this kind of curved stem. Just pulling these tight as I go to keep them all together. Okay. That may take you a little bit of practice to do to get a nice clean line on the first try. But you can always, if maybe it's too thick in one spot and you don't want to lift your whole piece back up, grab some more of your baby blue wool and just cover up the thicker spot. So I've got a pretty long tail down here. I'm gonna move this up just a little. So there's a couple of things I can do. I can anchor this a little bit more. I can just bring this wool back up and just kind of recover this area that I've already felted. And you know what? That works really well. I'm just gonna tuck it in, just like that. If your tail was thinner, you could just keep poking into one spot until it all just disappears underneath. So I'm going to fill in my leaf now. This this leaf on the pattern has a cute little shape, so I'm going to try to maintain that. So I'm pre-shaping my wool before I felt it down. And that helps me keep good control. So again, I've come down here, I've got this little bit of a tail. I'm just going to follow it down the stem until it disappears. The reason I try not to pull it off is because chances are you'll start pulling out fibers that you've already felted down. So it's easier just to try to continue felting until those fibers are gone. You can give these a little bit of a highlight if you'd like. I think just this general shape is pretty cute, but you could always add a little bit of a lighter green or even a darker green. Make a tiny little rope, give it a little stem or just a little vein is what I meant. Kind of a leaf stem, or you can give it just a little bit of a highlight on one edge. You're using a tiny amount of wool for this, very little, twisting to shape it. There we go. So that's a very small amount. And just adding it to the edge. I actually quite like it solid, so I'm going to lift this back up. And just leave it as is. I'm going to give this just a little more wool, a little more green wool right here so I can have a nice clean edge. Okay, so for the flower colors, I've pulled a few different options that I think would be really great for this. I'm going to use Sunshine for the top center of the flower, and I'll give it a little bit of Peaches and Cream just for some color interest. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. Grab a little bit of Sunshine and I'm just going to shape it before I set it down, before I add it. I think that looks great, especially just as one color. If you wanted to add a little bit of Peaches and Cream, make it maybe a little light in the center. That's what that looks like. And then I think Strawberry Smoothie is a great color for the petals. Obviously, a lot of these colors will work. I'll go ahead and start with Strawberry Smoothie. Maybe we'll add a bit of Peaches and Cream on top of that as well. So again, start with less and add more, especially when you're doing small areas. I'm going to pre-shape my wool so that it kind of fits in this little petal space. I'm going to tuck it right up next to the yellow center. Follow that line. Starting with less wool and adding more to it also helps you keep your lines a little bit cleaner, because that is less fibers, less fuzziness that you're having to deal with at one time. So it's a little bit easier to manage. I'm gonna go ahead and grab just a larger section of this Strawberry Smoothie to keep in my hand. I like the little kind of double edge here on the petal. The the end of the petal kind of like a forked, scalloped edge. So I'm going to try to keep that. So you'll notice for these petals, I'm filling in one side, bringing it to this kind of rounded point, and then grabbing another piece of wool and filling in the other side. And I'm concentrating on getting really sharp, clean lines for those petal edges. I'm going to kind of widen this, make this little forked edge a little more dramatic. One more. Now again, I think this looks great as one solid color. You could always come by and add a little bit of the dried lavender onto the flower. We could also add a little bit of peaches and cream. I think that's a good option. I think I'll add a little bit of that, grab a little bit more, and I'm just gonna do a little stripe of peaches and cream down the center of each petal. And I'm going to make it not a really solid stripe, but just kind of a little touch of color. It doesn't even have to go all the way down to the bottom edge of the petal. I think concentrating it toward the center is maybe a little more realistic, but you know what? This doesn't have to be realistic. This is your magical toadstool scene. Okay. All right, I think that flower is finished. And so now we have a few more details to add. While I'm here in this section with the flower, I'm going to add some grass blades, and I'm going to use apple green for the main part of the grass blade and give it a little bit of a shadow with ivy. So both of those colors are nearby. And I'm just going to do a few grass blades just kind of around the flower just to fill in this section of the hoop a little bit, create a little bit of movement and extra texture. And the way I do this is I like to just kind of pull off a long piece of wool. Go ahead and set that over there. I'm going to, again, twist. This is one of my favorite ways of shaping the wool. But I also want to make sure that this kind of comes to a point up at the top. And I'm going to spread this out. I want my grass blade to come to a point and also get a little bit wider toward the base. And this is where you can have fun with your texture, with the movement. I'm going to anchor the tip of my grass blade at the top and then just kind of play around with the shape. Maybe it gets a little bit wider and then kind of comes to a point a little bit. And then I'm using my left hand just to kind of guide the line. And maybe I don't want it to be straight up and down or straight at an angle. I can give it a little bit of a curve. If I want. And now I've got this tail down here again. I'm just going to fold it back upward. And do something like that. So these look good once you have a few. So I'm just going to keep adding some. Grab a little bit more apple green. Oh, that has a little bit of purple in it, so I'm just going to set that piece aside rather than try to pick it out. Although, not that that would look bad, it'd probably look pretty cute. And right now I'm having these kind of end right at this horizon line, as if they're growing right out of the top of this little section, or maybe even behind it a little bit. I'm going to have a few come over the line so that they're growing out in front of it. I'm going to do that over here. I'm going to make them a little bit smaller and even throw in a few extra flowers. So you can make your grass blades come in front of the flower. They can stay behind it. I'm going to make this one look like it is behind the flower and kind of coming up around it a little. So I'm going to have it anchor at the top. That's my point. I'm going to bring this all the way right to the edge of the stem. Then leaving the stem open, not felting on top of it, but continuing the bottom of the grass blade. Down here. So now it's behind the flower. You can have one come up in front of the flower. Maybe I want one kind of like this. And this is where placing your wool and setting it just on top of your piece, just to get an idea of the composition that you'd like, or you know, maybe you want to vary the length of your grass blades or the movement. I really love the shape of this leaf. I'm not sure if I want to cover it up, but maybe I could have a piece of grass coming up like this. Let's try that. So you don't always have to anchor it at the top first. I'm just going to anchor mine at the bottom. I do want to make it a little bit thicker though, because I don't want it to look like a transparent grass blade. Maybe it's a new species. Something like that. That looks good. Let's see, I'm going to make one go right behind the tip of this leaf here. So I'm going to go ahead and get the bottom part done. I'm going to do another one because I feel like this section needs a little bit more. So I'm going to have one be rooted right here. It's going to come up and over these. Let's make it a little bit thicker. So I'm going to add a little more wool. I kind of like playing with the round shape of the hoop as well, making the grasses kind of curve inward a little bit, or any other plants. We're going to do a fern on the other side that kind of follows the curve as well. And it's just a fun way to play around with the composition. Let's do another one that maybe kind of goes off the hoop. Okay, and I think we'll do a little short one right here. Just kind of round out this little tuft of grass. If you want to give this a little more texture and a little more dimension, grab a darker green. So I'm going to grab some ivy, and I'm going to give the right edge of each grass blade just a little line of green. A little goes a long way here, so you can make it really thin. And it's going to make a big difference. Now notice I'm being careful to kind of determine or to show which grass blade is in front and which grass blade is behind. Definitely want this one to be in front, so I'm going to just do this dark green edge all the way to the top along the whole length of that blade, and then behind it is this piece. One's behind as well. This little short one's in front, and then this one is behind. So kind of skip that edge. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing just on a very small scale over here. Again with a little bit of apple green. I'm going to make some short little lines that overlap the blue sky and they overlap this moss area. Now I've made a short line here. I have this really long tail. One thing I can do once I have my bottom edge anchored, I can bring this piece up. It's a little thin. Let me just kind of fold this over. I can bring this up and it can be another stem. And it's like they're both coming out of the same place. So again, have this extra little bit here. Just kind of make it come up and end where the fibers end. Let's see. I'm going to do one right here. See, this is, I think, the most fun part about doing a little mossy woodland toadstool scene is you get to play around, you get to create your own textures and your own little world. And so I want to add a couple little tiny flower buds here. Let me just make this a little bit thicker. And I'm going to add one more little line right here. Now, peaches and cream could be fun for this. Yep, I like that quite a lot. So what I'm going to do is grab a little bit of peaches and cream and roll it up into a ball. And I'm going to add this right here to the top of this green stem. So it's like a little puff ball of a flower. I think it's cute. I'm going to do that to this little stem right next to it and make it not quite as tall. You could add maybe another one down here. You could definitely get more detailed with little flowers if you want. You can make more echinaceas. This is very echinacea-like to me. You could always mix a little bit of yellow with a green too to get another shade of green. You can mix a little bit of blue with a green or purple. Here, I'm going to redefine. I kind of muddied up this area, so I'm just going to add a little more green there. I'm going to tuck a little bit of ivy right here. I'm going to break this up. And I'm going to add a little bit more peaches and cream to this one. I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger. Now you can go ahead and add some more of these little blades of grass elsewhere. Let me scoot this up. I like adding them down here. Let's go for a slightly different shape. Maybe we'll make them a little bit wider. Lots of little texture places. Okay, the next thing I want to show you is how to do kind of a leaf frond. It'll be kind of fern-like up here in this area. Over here on the right side of the hoop, I'm going to add a little bit of texture in the form of a plant and play around with the composition and the round shape of the hoop, again, by just kind of following this curve and letting a plant just look like it naturally belongs here and just kind of is enveloping this area, and it's creating a little bit of an environment for the toadstool. So I'm going to use a little bit of this forest green, and I want to decide where I want my frond to live and the basic stem shape. And once I have the stem shape down, then we'll start adding some leaves. So I'm going to twist this just to kind of form what shape I want. And maybe I don't want it to follow exactly the curve of the hoop, which you totally could if you want, but you also don't have to. I think I maybe want it to diverge a little, kind of come inward and over the toadstools. And I really like this general placement. So I'm going to start here. I'm just going to try to keep this right here, anchoring my hand on top of it and just laying it down, and I'm twisting this bottom edge. I'm going to have the little frond connect to this edge here rather than the top horizon line. I'm going to twist this too as I go. You can make this as long as you'd like. I think I want mine to end right about here. So I'm actually just going to have the end of the stem culminate in a leaf. So I'm going to make these leaves kind of a teardrop shape. So I'm just going to turn the end of this into a leaf shape. I think I'll make it a little bit bigger. There, a lot like that. So now I'm just going to add more leaves all the way down. I'm going to have them, again, this kind of teardrop shape where it's round at the end, kind of attaches to the stem at a point. Like that. You can do all of one side first and then come back and do the other, or we can just alternate. Do top and then bottom and then top and then bottom, however you are most comfortable. Okay, I'm going to keep adding these leaves, and once I've filled up my entire stem, I'll come back and show you how to add a little bit of detail. So feel free to leave this as a solid dark green. I think this actually looks really good, and you could even layer a couple different fronds, put one kind of in the background here. But if you want to add a little bit of detail color-wise to this, you could take a little bit of a lighter green. Ivy is what I'm going for here. And we could just add a little bit to like 1/2 of each of these leaves. And it gives it just a little more detail, a little more color. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to come back and add a little bit more forest green on this side. It kind of pulled away. You also don't have to do it to every leaf. I can maybe just do it to the top few. But it's a fun way to inject a little bit more color and a little bit more detail into your forest scene here. As I get closer to the base of the stem, I think I'm going to use less ivy. So I'm going to make, instead of doing half of the leaf, I'll just do a line. And maybe that just indicates an older leaf. I think when you look at a piece like this, it's those little details that make all the difference, right? It's that little bit of extra work that you put in that's just, it really wows everyone. Okay. Now you could do more of these fronds. This would look fun in the background behind these. I would alternate height. My preference is to have a little bit of asymmetry. So I would probably do maybe one that starts down here and kind of comes down a little bit, or you could have one, maybe you could alternate, or instead of doing a flower, you could do one on this side too, and maybe it starts a little bit lower, has more of a curl to it. There are so many different variations you could do for this hoop to make it your own and put your own spin on it. So we've got a few more details to add in the bottom mossy section, so I'm going to reposition and I'll see you in a second. I want to bring in some of this pink and yellow color down into the mossy area, so I'm going to show you how to do a different version of a flower, one that's maybe just like peeking through the moss. These are some of my favorite ones to add in my toadstool hoop. So I'm going to grab some strawberry smoothie here. Go ahead and get a little bit more. And I like to make these by pre-shaping my wool. So I'm actually just going to start, I've got this, this little piece here. Maybe this is about the size of a nickel or so, small coin. I'm going to start folding over these edges. Like this. So now I have these very rounded edges. I'm going to place this, let's see, I'm going to add a flower right here. I'm going to start poking right in the middle. Be careful of your finger. And then now I want to start poking down the sides. But because you've folded the wool over and you've already created this kind of this volume here with the wool, you're actually using that fold to your advantage, and it's going to create a little bit of a petal texture for you. So if you keep poking in the middle, and then if you push inward, you can create little individual petals. So I am taking my needle, pushing in and making that little divot, and as I push in, I'm also going to poke at the same time. So I'm using a little bit of relief here, a little bit of the wool in 3D to create this shape. And then I'm gonna make a little ball of yellow wool. Just poke it right in the center. The peach wool in the center would also be beautiful. A peach flower like this would be beautiful, a yellow flower, white. So that's one way we can make a flower. We could also just do individual little petals. So I'm going to take a little bit of strawberry wool, just kind of roll it up into a ball with my finger. And I'm going to place this one right here. I can just make kind of a round shape. And I can do that multiple times, connect them all in the same place. So let's make this the center of the flower. This is the outside of the petal. This works better if you're a little generous with the wool. Use a little bit more. And also, here's a hint. If you're trying to manipulate your wool and roll it up into a ball, lick your finger. And that will help you control the fibers. We'll make this one another 4-petal flower. By concentrating your pokes along the outside edge, you're naturally making this piece of wool kind of stick up in the middle. Gives you a little bit of dimension. And then I'm going to add another yellow center. Like that. So I'm going to do a few more of those flowers. Let's see, I think I'll add maybe a small version right here. I like the idea of having a little trio. And it kind of balances out the pink in the composition here. So I'm going to, let's start a new one. I'm going to fold some wool over toward the center. Poke it in the middle. Poke it along the edges. And then I can push in and poke and create a little bit of that texture. And a little bit of yellow. When you're poking in little balls of wool like this, it's best not to poke right in the center for your first time attaching it, because if the ball is small enough and you poke right in the center of the ball, you might actually grab that whole piece of wool and push it right down into your foam pad. It's happened to me before. So I recommend poking along the outside of the wool ball first a couple of times, and then if you want to poke it in the center, you can, but at least you've got a couple different anchor points now, and it won't just disappear right into your piece. Okay. I'm going to mix a little bit of strawberry smoothie with peaches and cream. To get a little bit of a lighter pink. So again, I'm going to stack them, pull them apart, stack them, pull them apart, and just keep this going until it's as mixed as I want it to be. Now I'm just going to see what this looks like. Yeah, that's another great option. So I'm gonna do a few more of these flowers, I think. I'll do one right here. So just to determine where I want to place them, I'm just gonna set my wool on top. I like, maybe move it up a little bit, maybe right about there. And maybe one over here too. Maybe two over here. This is how I like to figure things out. I'll start with these two, then we'll figure out if we want to do another one. So I've already kind of folded it over. And I definitely don't mind if these are different sizes. I think they even look good without a center. I'll go ahead and put one in, but I'll go ahead and get this one in first. Yeah, let's do one more over here. Let's make it a little closer to these grass blades. And I wonder what these would look like with a peaches and cream center. I know I've already used it mixed with the strawberry smoothie, but maybe it's a slightly different kind of flower. Yeah, let's try that. So just plain peaches and cream right in the middle. So now we have a couple different color variations. You could even go with a darker center, maybe purple. Roll that up into a ball. Okay, now is the time to make any final adjustments. So I'm going to play around a little bit with maybe some more grass blades. Maybe we want some kind of coming up in this area. Let me just lay some out and see. Yeah, I really like this. I like this texture just kind of continuing over. So what I'm going to do is start one right here. And I don't mind one coming up and kind of overlapping this flower a bit. Definitely though, if you've made something you really like, if you really love a flower and you don't want to cover it up, by all means, let it show. Okay, I'm gonna put one more right here to kind of alter the growth direction of it. do, let's see, do we want one here? All right, let's do one more. Yep, I'm gonna put one that's kind of coming up and meeting this area that's just kind of overlapping. Change the direction a bit and then take up some space right here. Now, there are so many more details we could add if you wanted, if you just really wanted to fill this with tons of texture. I think that would be amazing. I'm going to stop here and show you how to pull this up and then finish the back. Once you have all of your felting finished, it's time to lift your piece from your foam pad. So the way I do this is I like to keep one hand on my piece and just kind of pressing down, and that keeps your foam pad in place. And I use my other hand to start gently tugging the fibers loose from the foam pad. So I'm just going to gently pull this up. And I like to just change the position of my hand, pull from different sections. You can see the fibers releasing from the foam pad. You can even go from the top if you'd like, or switch hands, pull from the left. Any section that you've worked a lot in will be a little more anchored, so you might have to tug that a little bit harder, but don't worry, this will not hurt your piece. There we go, and here's what it looks like from the back. Very fuzzy, that's all the poking that we did, and there's from the front. So next up, I'm going to show you how to put this in an embroidery hoop. You have the option here to iron this if you'd like. So you can press it with a hot iron. Often, I like to press mine from the back just to flatten these fibers down. I just do a quick swipe with an iron to flatten them because I usually like to cover a piece in the back with cardstock. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to show you how to attach it to a hoop with a glue gun. But if you want to iron it, you can. But a word of caution, if you have any fine line details, or if you are relying on any kind of relief for your piece, so you've got wool that is sticking up and you're using that as a part of your piece for dimension, if you iron it, if you flatten it, it will change the way it looks. So keep that in mind. If you've never done it before, you may want to try a test piece first, okay? When you're ready to put this in the embroidery hoop, you're going to separate the two rings. So if it's a little tight, just loosen this up, separate these, and you're going to put the inner ring without the clasp underneath your piece. And then do your best to center that hoop underneath your piece. So I just kind of press down on the edges, try to find the top and the bottom. Might need to adjust it a little bit by pushing it. We can adjust it once it's in the hoop as well, but it's easier if you get it centered as best as you can first. Then take your outer ring. I'm going to use the fastener as my top and loosen it up a little bit more so that there's a little bit of leeway where you can press this over the inner hoop. If you're having a hard time pressing it down, loosen it up more. Okay, I've got it over the hoop. I still need to stretch it a little bit. See how it's a little wavy? It's kind of loose, the fabric is. I want it to be tight, but I need to fasten this. I need to tighten this a little bit more. So I'm going to turn that, make my outer hoop a little bit tighter. And now I'm just going to gently start to tug on the edges. I'm going to tug from all angles, especially if I see any areas where maybe there's a little bit of linen showing through. I'm going to tug right there. I want it to be nice and tight. Okay, now once you have your fabric pretty tight as you'd like it to be, you will fasten this down a little bit more, as tight as it'll go. I'm going to pull this a little more here. Sometimes hoops are just a little looser in some areas. Okay, yep, I like this. Now I'm going to tighten this down even more. And the next step is to trim this fabric so that we can attach it permanently to the hoop with hot glue. So I'm going to use my scissors here. Trim the excess. I want to leave about a ½ an inch, about a centimeter or so, roughly all the way around. And then now I'm going to hot glue this fabric edge to the wooden hoop by placing a bead of glue for 4 or 5 inches and folding this over. So I'm going to place a bead of glue right along the fabric, fold it down. Just make sure it attaches to the wooden hoop. I'm going to continue this all the way around the edge. Okay, one more section. All right. Clean up any little fuzzies. And I cannot wait to see your woodland toadstool hoops.